I was talking to a private equity contact of mine recently, a guy who spent the last decade chasing those high-growth tech unicorns, luxury real estate, all the glamorous.
Right. The usual suspects.
Exactly. And he showed me something on his screen that looked, I have to say, remarkably boring.
Boring is not a word you hear much in private equity.
Not at all. It wasn't a sleek new app or, a skyscraper floor plan. It was just a map of a 2,000-kilometer power line stretching from the desolate deserts of Xinjiang all the way to the industrial heart of Sichuan. And he said to me, for the first time in my career, the state is asking for my help to build the spine of the country.
Wow. The spine of the country, that's a heavy phrase.
It really is. And his face had this mix of disbelief and cautious calculation, because for years the state grid has been the ultimate forbidden city of Chinese infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely. Impenetrable. A massive state-funded monopoly where private money just, it didn't belong.
You could build a factory, a shopping mall, whatever, but you didn't own the wires that powered them.
Never.
And yet here he was, looking at a government notice, inviting private players to take a 10% stake in a 31 billion yuan project.
That's a huge shift.
A huge shift. He kept scrolling through the specs of these, what he called steel giants, marching across the wilderness, carrying the electricity needed to fuel the AI revolution, the endless fleets of electric vehicles.
And on the surface, I imagine that looks like a pretty rare olive branch.
It does. I mean, in an economy where the property market is totally stalled and private investment hit a record low in 2025, a guaranteed 5% return over 35 years sounds like, well, a sanctuary.
35 years. That's stability you can't find anywhere else right now.
To my friend, these humming high voltage cables, they represented a kind of stability he hadn't seen in years. But then the conversation, it took a sharper turn.
Okay.
He pointed to the record-breaking slump in private fixed asset investment, the regulatory uncertainty that's haunted the private sector for years.
The big question.
And he asked, is this a genuine opening of the gates, or is the state just looking for someone to help shoulder the risk now that the old funding models are broken? It captures this massive shift happening right under the surface of the Chinese economy. The iron rice bowl of state infrastructure is being cracked open.
And whether private investors choose to eat from it, that's going to tell us everything we need to know about the future of the world's second largest economy.
We're looking at a convergence of, what, 3 massive storylines here?
At least 3. You have the engineering story, which is just about raw physics and geography. Then you've got the financial story, this radical shift in how the state funds its own growth.
And then the big one, the tech story, how this grid actually powers the next industrial revolution.
Right. They're all braided together. You can't understand one without the others.
I want to pause on that term you used earlier and that my friend used. The forbidden city of infrastructure. It's such a heavy metaphor. For anyone listening who hasn't spent time studying China's economic history, we really need to unpack what the iron rice bowl actually means in this context. We throw that term around a lot, but it's visceral.
It is visceral. It's not just a job guarantee, it's a social contract. Well, the iron rice bowl, or Taifan one, historically it referred to state jobs that gave you cradle-to-grave security. You couldn't be fired. You got your housing, your health care, everything.
Total security.
And in the world of industries, the state grid was the ultimate iron rice bowl. It was a monopoly in the strictest, most absolute sense of the word.
You couldn't touch it.
You couldn't even get close. The idea that private capital, money from guys like your friend chasing unicorns, would be allowed to own a piece of the actual transmission lines, that was completely unthinkable 10 years ago.
It's a fundamental change.
It's like the U.S. Navy asking a tech startup to co-own an aircraft carrier. It's just, it doesn't compute with the old model. It shows a fundamental shift in the state's whole approach to funding its national strategy.
And that shift isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening because they're building something of a scale that is. It's almost hard for us to comprehend.
The numbers are mind-boggling.
I was digging into the engineering specs for this Xinjiang-Sichuan line, and honestly, calling it a power line almost feels like an insult. It's more like a planetary machine.
It is the largest interconnected machine on Earth. And to understand why they're cracking open that iron rice bowl to fund this, you have to get your head around the sheer physical difficulty of what they're trying to do.
Yeah, this isn't just stringing some copper wire from a pole.
Not even close.
I was looking at some drone footage recently.
Yeah.
It was of the Tian Shan mountain range where these steel giants, these new ultra-high voltage lines, are being anchored directly into the permafrost.
Into permafrost. Just think about the engineering challenge there.
Incredible. And there's this engineer, Lao Wei, who has spent 30 years moving from one massive grid project to the next. He describes these UHV towers not as mere utility poles, but as the spine of the country. To him, the Xinjiang-Sichuan line is a feat of physics that most nations, they wouldn't even attempt it, transmitting thousands of megawatts over thousands of kilometers with almost no loss.
Most nations couldn't even draw it on a whiteboard, let alone build it.
As I watched this interview, it just struck me that this isn't just about electricity. It's about the raw physical evidence of a state that can project its engineering will across an entire continent.
It's a physical manifestation of strategy.
Exactly. We always talk about national dominance in terms of, GDP numbers or market caps. But for people like Lao Wei, the real proof is that the sheer weight of the aluminum and the steel crossing the desert. It represents a level of strategic planning that ensures the nation's nervous system is built for the next century, not just the next fiscal quarter.
And Lao Wei's perspective is so crucial here because he's seeing the geography problem firsthand. To really get this, we have to talk about something called the Huhuanying line.
Yes, it's an imaginary line.
It is an imaginary line drawn across China from the northeast down to the southwest. And the population distribution is just staggering. East of that line, you have 94% of the population.
94%.
West of the line is 57% of the country's land area, but only 6% of the people.
Right. All the energy is on the wrong side of the line.
It's on the complete wrong side. It's this massive geographic mismatch. 80% of the hydropower is in the southwest. 76% of the coal is in the northwest.
And all the new stuff. The solar, the wind.
It's all in the Gobi Desert, thousands of kilometers from the factories in Shanghai or the tech hubs in Shenzhen. So you're left with a choice.
Right.
You can either try to move the factories and the people to the desert, which is, well, it's hard. People don't want to live there. Or
you move the power to the people.
You move the power to the coast.
But moving power that far is a total nightmare, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just remember my basic high school physics resistance. If you run a wire for 2,000 kilometers, doesn't most of the electricity just, dissipate into heat before it even gets there?
And standard grid, yes, absolutely, you'd lose a huge chunk of it. And that is precisely why this UHV ultra-high voltage technology is such a game changer.
Okay, so let's get technical for a second, because I think this is the key.
Think of electricity like water in a hose. The current is the volume of water flowing through, and the voltage is the pressure pushing it.
Okay, the hose analogy. So I want to move a lake's worth of water from Xinjiang all the way to Shanghai.
Okay. If you try to do that by just increasing the volume of water, the current, you're going to need a ridiculously thick pipe. And the friction against the walls of that pipe creates a ton of heat.
Right, that's resistance.
That's resistance. And in electricity, the formula for power loss is I squared R. That means the loss increases with the square of the current.
The square, so it's not linear.
Not at all. If you double the current, you get 4 times the heat loss. If you triple it, you get 9 times the loss. Over 2,000 kilometers, you'd be doing a great job of heating up the desert and the birds sitting on the wire, but you wouldn't be lighting up very many homes in Shanghai.
So you can't push more volume. You have to push with more pressure.
Correct. You have to jack up the voltage, the pressure, to absolutely insane levels. We are talking 800,000 volts, 1,000,000 volts, even 1.1 million volts.
The 1,000,000 volts, it's just a crazy number.
But by doing that, you can drop the current down to a trickle and still deliver the exact same amount of total power at the other end.
It's like using a tiny high-pressure needle jet instead of a giant slow-moving fire hose.
And the efficiency gains are they're staggering. The loss rate on these UHV lines is around 3.5% per 1,000 kilometers.
That sounds like a physics miracle.
It is. It allows China to effectively treat the entire continent as one single integrated grid. But the real secret sauce here isn't just the wire itself. It's the converter stations at each end.
Right. Converter valves. It sounds like a car part, but I looked up a picture of one of these things, and it's the size of a 4-story building.
They are the beating heart of the entire system. You see, to transmit power that efficiently over that kind of distance, you have to use DC direct current.
Okay.
But our power plants generate AC alternating current, and everything in your house uses AC. So at the start of the line, you need a massive station to convert huge amounts of AC to DC, shoot it across the desert,
and then have another massive station at the other end to convert it back to AC before it goes to the cities.
And that conversion process is incredibly, incredibly difficult from an engineering perspective.
Why is it so hard?
Because inside those valves, you have these stacks of thyristors. They're essentially just very high-powered switches, and they have to fire with microsecond precision while holding back 1,000,000 volts of pressure.
1,000,000 volts.
If they misfire, if their timing is off by the tiniest fraction of a second, the whole station could literally blow up.
Wow. And this was technology that China didn't have for a long time, right?
For a long time, they couldn't build these. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, if you walked into a state grid control room, the logo on the critical hardware was Siemens or ABB.
Germany and Switzerland, they own this tech. And that's what really struck me about the story of that engineer, Lao Wei. He's not just proud of the physical line, he's proud that they built it. The IP for these converter valves, the special insulation technology for high altitudes, the software that balances the load, it's all domestic now.
They went through this really rigorous period of what they call assimilation and innovation. They bought the foreign tech, they took it apart, they figured out exactly how it worked.
Reverse engineered it.
And then, because they had the sheer scale of projects to practice on, they actually improved it. They had to solve problems the Europeans never had to solve because, well, Europe isn't big enough to need a 1.1 million volt line.
So they leapfrogged them.
They did. Now, State Grid holds the patents. They're the ones writing the book. They're helping set the global IE standards for this stuff because no one else is doing it at this scale.
So we have this incredible engineering triumph, a domestic spine built with domestic technology. But even if you own the IP, you still have to pay for all that steel, all that concrete, all that labor.
Dude.
And that brings us right back to the money, to this 31 billion yuan project for the Xinjiang-Sichuan line.
And this is where the story pivots from physics to finance. The state is looking at a 4 trillion yuan investment requirement for the grid over the next 5 years.
4 trillion yuan. That is a massive amount of liquidity, even for an economy the size of China's.
It's an astronomical sum.
And traditionally, the state banks would just, print the money or issue government bonds, and that would be the end of it. Why bring in the private sector now?
And the answer is that the old engines of the economy are sputtering a bit. You have to look at the macro picture.
Okay.
The property sector, which for decades was the primary way local governments raised money and how ordinary people stored their wealth, that has completely stalled out.
Right.
And at the same time, fixed asset investment from the private sector is down significantly. I think the number was almost 6.4% in 2025.
So you have all this private capital just sitting on the sidelines. You've got wealthy individuals, private equity firms, family offices. They're terrified of the stock market volatility. They can't just keep buying apartments like they used to, and they can't easily move the money offshore because of capital controls.
Precisely. It's essentially trapped capital, and it's looking for a safe home. And right on cue, the state grid comes along and offers them a deal. Give us your cash to help build this line, and we will give you a 10% equity stake.
Let's really dig into the terms of that deal, because this is where my friend was getting skeptical. They're offering a guideline return of around 5% return on equity.
Right.
In the high-flying days of Chinese tech just a few years ago, 5% was a joke. You could make that in a week on a good stock dip. Why would anyone lock their money up for 35 years for just 5%?
Text. In a deflationary environment, or an environment where all your other assets are depreciating, a guaranteed 5% is gold.
It's the guaranteed part that's key.
It's effectively guaranteed by the state pricing mechanism. It's as close to a sure thing as you can get in finance.
But is it actually guaranteed? My friend brought up regulatory uncertainty. What if the National Development and Reform Commission, the NDRC, what if they just decide to change the pricing formula in 5 years and cut the returns?
That is the risk. Right. The NDRC sets the transmission fees for using the lines. It's a regulated monopoly price. But you have to think about the counterparty risk.
Meaning, who are you doing business with?
Exactly. Who are you making the deal with? You are doing business directly with the central government on a project that powers the entire nation's industrial base. The likelihood of them defaulting on the spine of the country is so much lower than, say, a private real estate developer defaulting on a new condo project.
So it's the ultimate safe harbor argument. In a storm, you tie up to the biggest, strongest ship in the port.
The biggest ship in the port, yes.
I know. I heard about a private business owner. He's in a coastal manufacturing hub. Let's just call him Mr. Chen.
Okay.
And he had grown so weary of what he called the casino nature of the global stock markets, just tired of the volatility.
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
For sure. And when the government announced that private capital could now take a stake in these UHV projects, he didn't see a low 5% return. He saw a fortress for his capital.
Interesting.
You can just imagine him sitting in his office looking at a 35-year contract. I mean, that's a duration longer than most companies even exist. For a guy like Mr. Chen, this isn't a speculative gamble.
Oh.
It's an invitation to tie his family's legacy to the very energy security of the state. My perspective on this, as someone who follows global markets, is that this state-guided model, it offers this fascinating alternative to all the volatility we see in the West.
It's a different philosophy of capital.
While Western investors are out there chasing unicorns that might crash and burn tomorrow, the Chinese system is directing private wealth into the literal physical foundations of the country. I understand why some might find 5% modest, but in an era of global instability, there's a profound, almost patriotic logic in choosing a stable, state-backed pulse over the chaotic swings of a speculative market.
Fortress for his capital is the perfect phrase for it. And there's another layer to Mr. Chen's thinking, which you touched on, which some people call patriotic capital.
Yeah.
By investing in this project, he is explicitly aligning himself and his business with the state's most important strategic goals. And in China, political alignment is a form of risk management.
That's a very interesting way to put it.
If you are actively helping the country achieve energy security, you become a friend of the system. That carries these intangible benefits that don't show up on a spreadsheet, but they are incredibly valuable for a business owner over the long term.
It creates what you might call a community of interest. If the grid succeeds, Mr. Chen succeeds. If the state's energy strategy works, his investment pays off. It binds the private sector directly to the success of the state's infrastructure.
And from the state's perspective, they get to use Mr. Chen's money to build essential public goods while they retain full operational control.
Right, this isn't privatization in the Western sense.
It's a hybrid model. It's state-led, but with multi-party participation. They aren't selling off the grid like Margaret Thatcher sold off the utilities. They are just selling a ticket to ride on the grid's revenue stream for a few decades.
Okay, so Mr. Chen writes the check. The state grid builds the line. Laowei anchors it in the permafrost. The electrons start flowing. But where are they all going? We've established that the East Coast needs the power. But it's not just for air conditioners and toaster ovens anymore, is it? The demand profile itself is changing dramatically.
It's changing so fast. And this is the third pillar of the story, the technology nexus. We absolutely have to talk about what is actually eating all this new electricity.
And the demand isn't coming from the old places.
Not anymore. It's shifting away from heavy industry, the old steel mills, the cement factories, and it's moving straight into the digital economy. Artificial intelligence and electric vehicles.
I feel like every single deep dive we do mentions AI these days, but in this case, the connection is so deeply physical.
It is entirely physical. People don't realize how much energy AI consumes. Training one of these large language models, the kind that powers the chatbots we all use, it requires thousands of GPUs running at full capacity 24/7 for months on end.
And the heat they generate is immense.
Immense.
Yeah.
And cooling them takes even more power than running them in the first place.
I read somewhere, and it sounded like hyperbole, that a single big training run for a new AI model can use as much electricity as a small town does in an entire year. True?
It's not hyperbole at all. And as we move toward these future trillion parameter models, the energy density required is, frankly, terrifying.
And this is becoming a real bottleneck, isn't it?
It's a huge bottleneck. In the US and in Europe, we are already seeing plans for new data centers getting rejected by local authorities because the local grid literally cannot handle the load. They're being told, sorry, come back in 5 years when we've built a new substation.
And in the world of AI development, 5 years is an entire century. You're out of the race.
You're completely out of the race. If you have to wait for power, you lose. China is treating energy availability as a solved problem for its tech sector. They're essentially saying to their tech giants, you build the data center wherever you want, the power will be there.
That's a massive competitive advantage.
Yeah.
It connects to a concept I saw in the research notes. Eastern data, Western computing.
Yeah, it's a really clever national strategy. Data, which is just bits, is light and easy to move over fiber optic cables. Electricity, which is electrons, is heavy and hard to move.
Right.
So the first part of the strategy is, why not move the data to where the power is? They are building these massive data center clusters out in the West, in places like Gizu, Inner Mongolia, Gansu, right next to the giant hydro dams and the new wind and solar farms.
So you send the raw data west for processing, run your AI models there where the power is cheap and plentiful, and then just send the answers back east.
That's one part of it, yes. But for some applications, that doesn't work. Think about things that need super low latency, like autonomous driving in a city like Shanghai.
You can't have a lag.
You can't have a lag. The car needs to make a decision in a millisecond. The servers can't be in Mongolia. The speed of light itself is too slow. You need the servers to be physically close to the cars in Shanghai.
Which means you have to bring the electrons east.
You have to bring the power to the data. And that is exactly what the UHV line is for. It's the other half of the strategy.
You know, you should try to imagine a massive data center on the outskirts of Chengdu. Thousands of servers are just humming, training the AI models that are going to power tomorrow's autonomous vehicles.
It's an incredible image.
I came across this story about a young technician there, a woman named Xiao Lulu. And she had this realization one day that the clean energy that was cooling her servers actually started as a gust of wind in the Gobi Desert, thousands of miles away.
Ow.
Without those UHV lines, her high-tech facility would just be a silent warehouse full of useless silicon. This connection. It's the secret sauce of China's industrial strategy.
It's a direct physical correlation.
You cannot have global leadership in artificial intelligence or electric vehicles if you don't have the heavy lifting infrastructure to move massive amounts of green energy to where the brains are.
The hardware enables the software.
Reading about her work just made me realize that China isn't just building power lines. They're building the indispensable platform for the fourth industrial revolution. In my view, this is the ultimate competitive advantage. While the rest of the world is devoting digital policy, this infrastructure ensures that the physical requirements for high-tech supremacy are already set in stone.
Xiaolulu's servers are essentially wind-powered, but the wind is blowing 3 provinces away. It's what makes the whole green AI concept actually feasible at scale.
Exactly. And it also addresses the other massive power hog we mentioned, electric vehicles.
China is pushing EVs harder and faster than anyone else on the planet. But there's always been this question about the grid.
The 6 p.m. problem. I've always wondered about this. Everyone gets home from work at the same time. They all plug in their car. They turn on the air conditioning. They start cooking dinner. That simultaneous spike in demand must be an absolute nightmare for grid operators.
It is the single biggest fear for any utility manager. If everyone plugs in at once, the grid doesn't just struggle, it can actually melt. You get blackouts. Well, this is where the UHV grid and the concept of the smart grid come together. It's not just about the big transmission wire. It's about the intelligence that you build in at the end of the wire.
You mentioned V2G, vehicle to grid, in the notes. I have to admit, I'm a little skeptical here. I buy an electric car to drive it. Why on earth would I let the power company drain my car's battery when it's parked in my garage? That just sounds like a terrible deal for me as a consumer.
It does sound like a terrible deal if you're doing it for free, but imagine this scenario.
Yeah.
You get home and plug your car in at 6 p.m. The grid is super stressed. The wholesale price of electricity is very high. Your car's smart charger sees this, and it sells a little bit of its remaining charge back to the grid to help stabilize the voltage in your neighborhood.
And I get paid for that electricity.
You get paid a premium rate for it. Then, later that night, at 3 a.m., when overall demand is super low and the wind in Xinjiang is blowing like crazy, the grid charges your car back up to full at a rock-bottom price.
So my car becomes an energy trader while I'm asleep.
Your car becomes a distributed battery, a tiny piece of a massive virtual power plant. But to make that whole system work, you need a grid that can handle massive bidirectional flows of power across the entire country. Instantly.
You need the UHV backbone.
You need the UHV lines to move the baseload renewable power from the west, and then you need the local smart grid to manage all those little fluctuations from the cars. Without the UHV backbone, the V2G concept just falls apart because you can't get the cheap green energy to the cities in the first place.
So a company like State Grid isn't just a simple utility company anymore. It's becoming a tech platform. It's like the AWS of energy.
That is a very, very astute comparison. They are providing the fundamental hardware platform upon which the entire digital and green economy runs. And because they're doing this at a continental scale, they are solving complex problems that no one else in the world is even facing yet.
And that experience, that expertise, that brings us to the global angle. We've been very focused on the domestic side of this, Lao Wei in the mountains, Mr. Chen in his office. But China doesn't tend to keep this kind of technology to itself.
Yeah, they are actively and very strategically exporting the standard. The best example is in Brazil, the Belo Monte Dam project. It's this massive hydro project deep in the Amazon that needs to get its power to the big coastal cities, Rio and São Paulo.
The geography sounds almost identical to China's West-East dynamic.
And who won the contract to build the ultra-high voltage transmission lines to make it work? State grid.
So they are essentially just copy-pasting the Xinjiang-Sichuan solution and dropping it into Brazil.
And with it, they bring their technology, their engineers, and most importantly, their standards. This is the really subtle part of geopolitical influence.
So,
if you build your national grid using Chinese UHV specifications, then for the next 40 or 50 years, any maintenance you do, any upgrades, any new equipment you buy has to be compatible with those original specifications. You lock in the technology ecosystem for generations.
It's like Apple's walled garden, but for high voltage electricity. Once you're in, it's very hard to leave.
It's the ultimate walled garden, and it's all driven by what you could call the flywheel effect.
The flywheel.
Yeah. Because China is building 40,000 kilometers of this stuff at home, their domestic factories are just churning out the transformers, the converter valves, the cables at a volume that no competitor can even touch. It crushes them on unit cost.
So if you're a country like Brazil or Pakistan or anyone in the global south looking to modernize your energy infrastructure,
the bid from the Chinese company comes in 30% cheaper. It comes with the financing from a Chinese bank, and it comes with a proven track record of success at an unmatched scale. It's not really a choice at that point.
And meanwhile, in the West, we struggle to build a single new transmission line across a state border because of years of permitting issues and not in my backyard protests.
That is the stark contrast, and it creates this massive learning by doing advantage. Chinese engineers have accumulated all this tacit knowledge, the little things that aren't written down in the manuals, about how to handle these extreme voltages and build across impossible terrain.
It's a competitive moat that's very hard to cross.
And what it does strategically is convert what used to be a vulnerability. China's heavy reliance on imported oil and gas into a massive strength. Energy self-sufficiency, powered by domestic renewables, and transported on a grid that they completely control and are now exporting to the world.
When you lay it all out like that, it's an incredibly comprehensive strategy. It ties together the geography, the finance, and the technology into one single coherent package.
And it's a package that offers a very compelling value proposition to the rest of the developing world. The message is, we have solved the energy transition. Here are the blueprints. Here is the financing. And here are the engineers to help you build it.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, let's go back to that map my private equity friend showed me on his screen. At first glance, it was just a boring line on a map. But after peeling back all these layers, it's clearly so much more than that.
It is a civilization-scale endeavor. I think we in the West often get caught up in the software, the apps, the flashy consumer tech, but we forget that none of that works without the physical substrate underneath it all.
The hardware.
The hardware. And the UHV grid is the hardware platform for the Chinese economy for the 21st century.
It reminds me of the Roman roads. They were just stone and dirt, but they were the platform that allowed the empire to project power, to move resources, and to unify an entire continent.
That is the perfect historical parallel. The Roman roads carried legions, the UHV lines carry electrons. But the strategic purpose is exactly the same. Integration, ability, control.
The shift from made in China to created in China is being physically powered by these lines. And while that 5% return for private investors like Mr. Chen is financial, the return for the state is, well, it's existential.
It's about securing the energy required to lead the next era of industrial history. The wires crossing the Tian Shan Mountains aren't just carrying electricity, they are carrying the future.
And for anyone observing the global economy, watching how this iron rice bowl experiment plays out, seeing if private capital and the state can build this together, it'll be the key indicator to watch.
It does rewrite the rule book on how a nation builds its future.
A really fascinating look into the spine of the dragon. Thanks for walking us through all that.
It was my pleasure.